Hello and welcome to the labs of Spatial Data Science 110. In these labs, we will do the following. Basically, will be an additional guide to the Git book you have. So if for some reason the description is rather cryptic, you can make use of the video to see it in a different way and maybe find the menus easier. So I will basically focus on QGIS and show you around what you can do here. At the same time, what we will do today is simply focus on lab number 1, so where we deal with different base maps, different projections to create and compose a final map. That's the basic idea of this video here, and let's jump into it. So we start with simply recreating the workflow. Small reminder, you can make use of this workflow to get familiar with the entire procedure. However, you will be working on your own projects. So that means whatever I show you here, you should just take up as an example and transfer that to your individual work and project. Okay, so first item on our menu is Basemaps. Basemaps are pretty nice, and before we actually jump into Basemaps, it's probably a good idea to get a bit familiar with QGIS. So that's my home screen. If I open QGIS, you may find a different one if you open your version of it. The way you can mimic what I got is rather easy. Just go to View. Down there you will find panels where you can enable or disable certain panels. So what I typically like to have open is a browser because it gives me access to various base maps, which we will come to in a second. I also would like to see the layers because with the layers you typically work, shift them further up and down to highlight different parts on your map, which will be displayed in the middle. And then layer styling or the processing toolbox I typically have in a separate window. But you can go with whatever setting you're most comfortable with. This is just one example of how my QGIS looks like. And up here I got several toolbars depending on what kind of plugins I want to use. And also here you can check and uncheck various parts by just right-clicking into your toolbar. So this I also adjust as I go along. Okay, starting off with Basemaps, we first have to deal with plugins. Simply because the first part of the Basemaps we use will be based on a plugin, which is called Quick Map Services. So you can manage your plugins with the first menu item down here. And you can see all the plugins that exist for QGIS. That's a long list, which is great because these are all tools at your disposal, so you can make use of them if you need them. However, it's very much recommended to just use the tools you will actually use. So in our case, we will add the plugin Quick Map Services. And by the way, QGIS is as great as it is simply because that entire ecosystem of plugins exists. So multiple developers contribute to the variety of plugins that are at your disposal. And the great thing is, there are quite a few. Okay, so if we look for Quick Map Services, you will find that one here. And of course I have that particular plugin already installed. So instead of reinstall plugin, you will probably find install plugin here and just hit the button and you will find it under your installed items. So if you empty the search field, you will find all the plugins that are installed on your end. And Quick Map Services should be part of the composition of plugins you can use in QGIS. Alrighty, so once you have that plugin installed, you should see an additional map item, menu item called Web up here. And under Quick Map Services, you probably don't see that entire list here, but if you go to Settings and download the contribution pack, you should be in a position, great, to see all the different providers for Basemaps as I see them right now. So you can go with the familiar ones. I highly recommend to check out OpenStreetMap, and if you just click it, you will see a new map popping up, which is our base map, and that serves to be just a spatial reference to any data you on top of that will include in your QGIS project. Cool, so good, so far so good. Notice that if you zoom into different zoom levels, also the content of your map will adjust. So basically what's the mechanism behind it is that there are different tiles which you download depending on your field of view, and these will be also cached in the background of your system. So if you zoom in and zoom out, that will typically work a bit quicker than if you zoom into an entirely new area, where also rather quick the respective tiles will be provided. Okay, so now you know one way to get to different base maps, and again, feel free to test various base maps depending on your needs. Also note, if you have your base maps here in the layers menu, make sure that the one you want to look at is either on top of things, or you uncheck other base maps which simply are overlaying your respective base map which you want to inspect. Alrighty, the second option to look into different base maps would be via the XYZ tiles. Exactly. So here you have in your script various different categories, so high resolution imagery, road maps, and topography. And the way we go about it is, I just showed it for one example. You copy paste the respective URL, and in QGIS what you do here is you right click on XYZ tiles to open up a new connection which you can call respectively. So in our case it was Google Maps, and you copy paste the URL in that respective field, and then you should be ready to go. So once you open that menu, you should now see Google Maps, the respective name we just typed in before. I had the exact same one before, just with the addition satellite, so these two should be completely identical, and even if we zoom in, we should totally see the same content, which is true for both. So this would be one way to feed in additional satellite imagery to your QGIS project. And you can do the same, you can do the same with the road maps, so which would be a similar view to the ones we just had before, OpenStreetMap. You are probably also familiar with Google Streets, and CartoDB would be something on top you can check out. And the same holds true for topography. So for the sake of this video, it's highly advised that you download also the map then and the global hillshade base maps, simply because we're gonna need them later on for the visualizations. Okay, so we covered that one, the XYZ tiles. I think last in the list would be the web map service or the web map tile service. Very same procedure as we just had with XYZ tiles. So again, right click on that respective WMS menu, open up a new connection, which just opened on my second screen. You will be able to go to the respective section in the Git book, and you again should copy the URL if you want to go along with this particular web map service from SwissTopo. So what's the name we want to give it? I'm gonna give it a name as the agency, SwissTopo Maps, and paste the URL which we just copied in here. And to also be able to click OK, I have to just enlarge that field, and you will be able to see all the different maps which you typically find on map.geo.admin. Oopsie. I'm getting confused, so we probably should just make sure that we check that. Map.geo.admin, and here we are on that particular URL. You will find various base maps, which you can also now, with the WMTS menu, also add to your quick map services. So here what I typically use quite often times are the different Swiss maps. Damn, that's a long list. The national maps. Here we go. So these are the ones you might be familiar with from Now we've been running into an issue. These are the ones you're probably familiar with from the SwissTopo app. And we don't see that one matching or overlaying our previous base maps. Oh yes, they do. Well, for some reason, I've been in a different area. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so they spatially overlap. That's cool. That's exactly what we are looking for. And here you now will be able to just get all the national maps in as you like. Okay, next item on the list would be visualization. So for that particular part, I would like to make sure that we all have the global hillshade image and the topography layer included. So if you want to get rid of the existing layers, you can simply highlight them all and remove them. Shortcut for that one would be Command D in my case, and if you want to click OK to something, you can just use the Enter key. So the ones I'm looking for are the global hillshade image provided by Esri. Nice way to visualize terrain, and global topography, which we have in the map then global terrain layer. This one looks a bit dull, right? It's rather grayish. Why is that? Simply because we display it in grayscale colors. So if we want to change that, you should open the layer styling panel. You can do exactly the same if you go to properties and within properties you will find all the information of that respective layer or file which you loaded, and within this symbology you can also see very much the rendering type, which would be single band gray. So I prefer to do the styling within the styling panel, which is why I advise you to just open that panel from the view if you haven't opened that already. All right. So first of all, I don't want to display that in grayscale. I rather prefer having some colors. Colors are great because that also opens up the option to display different color ramps. And in order to get to color ramp, which resembles topography, we just have to go down here to the menu, create a new color ramp. We don't actually want to create a new one, but rather pick one from the catalog. However, the catalog is just hidden down here. So that specific one, CPT-city, is the one I'm looking for, and within that catalog you will find a menu called topography, which opens various color maps on topography. I will go with the one called DM poster, and that should enable to throw in some colors. Why don't we see colors at the moment? Well, simply because we stretch our color map quite a bit. If you see here, the min-max resemble all the elevations we have from the lowest point on Earth to the maximum point on Earth, roughly. So given that we are focusing on the Alps, we can start with 0 and go all the way up, maybe to 4,000, to show all the colors available within our color map. And you will see down here which value takes up which color, or which value range is likely to be within which color mix. And this looks way more pleasing to my eye, which is cool. Now I want to do something else. I would like also to combine the elevation map with the hillshade terrain. And this is easiest done by just looking at the transparency or opacity. So if we play around, 100% simply gives us color-coded elevation. If we go to 0%, now we have our underlying hillshade image, which we see in the layer below. But if we mix it, we're going to see a mix of both. Hillshade combined with the elevation information. So we can settle on a particular number here, maybe 70%, so 70% elevation, 30% hillshade terrain, and this would give us a nice mix of these two. You can now zoom around and see how that feels with different percentages, but for me that's right about fine. And zoom out a bit to see the entire Alps, and I think that concludes chapter 1. So in the second part we're going to look at how we compose our map and how we best deal with coordinate reference systems. Each map will have an underlying coordinate reference system. In our case, we were running on the Web Mercator projection. At the very lower right, you will see that respective EPSG number. This one is defined in our project properties, and that particular coordinate reference system looks probably quite familiar to you. So this is also the view many web applications, for example Google Maps, also use. However, it's not extremely suitable given that you can already tell various areas, particularly at high latitudes, are grossly distorted. So Greenland, Antarctica look way bigger than they actually are. So for anything that works on a global scale, it's actually a good idea to go with equal Earth projection, which has the particular EPSG number 8857. And we got an issue with our elevation map, which is fine. Okay, you can't complain. Let's get rid of these two, which aren't so telling anyway, and focus on an Easter egg. So in QGIS, if we want to load in a layer of all the countries, we can simply type in worlds in the coordinate field. Damn, shouldn't move. And we automatically get the world map of different layers on Earth, and we can explore. Also note that we swapped currently, simply because the only layer we have in our map at the moment is that world map, and that one comes in a particular projection. So in this case it's the global lat long projection, so giving all the coordinates in the decimal coordinate space. All the locations are provided with coordinates. This one is still distorted, but it's one way to map the globe. However, we would like to change the projection. Let's see how that works. We don't. Elevation layer must be okay. It probably was confused for whatever reason. One way to deal with that is simply closing QGIS. No, we don't want to save anything, and opening it again. Sometimes that's one way to deal with issues, and a good reminder on at this particular point would be to save your project in regular intervals. We haven't had anything in particular. So world map, and let's see how it deals with reprojections. Still throws an error at me, but basically does what it's supposed to do. It changes the projection. So how can you possibly know which projection you should go with? If it's global, go with the equal Earth projection we just had a look at, the EPSG 8857. If you work on a rather local or regional scale, as we do in our workflow, you should go with one of the projected coordinate systems. The Universal Transverse Mercator UTM would be one example of that one. Another example would be the Swiss coordinate system, EPSG 2056, or as in our case, we work beyond Switzerland, and the best one for Europe would be EPSG 3035. So for that reason, I define that projection in here, and for that transformation, we can choose between different reference systems. We go with the first one, which is fine. And you will notice the word looks a bit weird, like perspective projection located above Europe. However, still various areas look quite distorted. We won't be able to see Australia in that shape if we are situated right above Europe. However, within Europe, that projection works pretty good. So for that reason, we also select this one. So if we zoom in, things are fine. Feel free to play around with different projections. Gives you a good feel, and if you work in a different area where you are uncertain which projection you should use, feel free to look it up or just ask. That's what we are supposed to do here, is assisting you and help you along your personal projects. So, focusing on the Alps, we set the respective coordinate reference system, and you should from now on think about which layers you want to have in your map. So what I typically recommend is that you focus on the things you want to represent first and foremost. So in our case, our area of interest is the Alps, and our study object would be lakes. So for that reason, I just have the countries as an outline for reference, but what I want to use is the hillshade image, and this one comes from the Esri hillshade base map, and on top of that I want to highlight all the lakes in color because these are our prime focus and study objects, and everything else is rather subtle in the background. This way we can guide the attention of our readers and audiences to the most important parts of our map. However, you should, as a next step, really carefully think about what kind of layers you want to have on your map. You don't want to clutter it with unnecessary information. Keeping it simple is typically the best. And you will see in our example that we go with the lakes, country borders, and our area of interest, which would be the alpine parameter, which we drape over our base map. So you are absolutely free to play with different layers and decide which ones you want to take in and which ones you don't. But think about carefully where to get your layers from, and that's what we will focus in the next chapter. Alrighty, so let's jump into chapter number 3 on data acquisition. So this is the part where we download all the data we ideally want to display on our map. And in our example, we take up some orientation data. So next to our base map, we want to display where is land, where are oceans, and we have the outline of the countries as an additional shapefile. And we want to display our area of interest as the Alpine Convention parameter. For the land cover, we will focus in our example on lakes. You might be focusing on other parts, maybe glaciers, maybe forests. So you have a couple of pointers which you can make use of if you want to display other land cover areas. If these aren't exhaustive, you can go to lab number 3, which is linked in here, where you find additional repositories under Get Your Data, where you can make use of OpenStreetMap or various other repositories on a global, national, and local scale. So these are just hints for where you can download the data that is of interest to you. So what I've done is I downloaded these shapefiles. It's probably also a good idea to show you how the shapefiles look like. So if I move that window into your screen, it's too much on the left-hand side. You will see that shapefiles come not only as one file, but as multiple files. Unfortunately, shapefiles are still rather common. You should just deal with the fact that it's not a single file, but rather various files with different endings. The only thing you should pay attention to at this point, just grab your particular shapefile and you can drag and drop it into QGIS. You can either drop it in the main map, you can also drop it in your layers panel, and it will be added. And in this particular example of the countries downloaded from Natural Earth, sorry, you will see that it exactly resembles our world map, just in a different color. So you can do the same with land and ocean areas. Why? Because sometimes it's also quite nice to display oceans with one particular color to distinguish them from the rest. Even though we focus in our map only on land area part, for the most prominent part, think about that you probably also want to have an inset map which zooms out and displays your focus area on a larger scale, that people can orientate where your study area actually is. And in that inset map you probably want to have information about land and water. Okay, so going back to our Git book, I've downloaded all these areas, layers of interest, and in the next chapter we will see what we do to this data, namely making sure that's all in the right projection and also focusing only on the parts of certain data sets which are relevant to us. Okay. So once we downloaded all the data sets of interest, we should now make sure that they are all aligned and reprojected to the same projection. So we've discussed that in chapter 2, just to make sure. Once you download them, you can make sure in which projection these data actually is provided. And if you go under Properties in the Information menu, you will see the search entry, the Coordinate Reference System. So this one from the Alpine Convention comes in a system that is not specifically clarified with an EPSG number, at least I can't see it. So in order to make sure that it is projected correctly in the coordinate reference system, all other layers will be, you can do the following with vector files. So every polygons, points or lines, just export that feature, and within that export menu you will be asked in which projection it should be exported, and this way you can easily swap between different projections of vector data sets. Make sure that you first of all have the correct format. So we typically go with a GeoPackage. If we have vector files for any kind of raster file, we will use a GeoTIFF, but this is not an option right now given that it is in vector file. So we go with GeoPackage, and you're supposed to select a particular location on your computer where you typically save your files. Okay, so once you have it all in here, you can then press OK and it will be exported. Click OK. All right, so in this particular case we won't export them, but you now know which kind of workflow you can make use of. In the example of the lakes, you see here, for example, that we have all lakes distributed across Europe in our dataset. So various lakes from various countries, but in our map we only want to highlight the lakes within our study area, which would be in this Alpine Convention perimeter. So how do we export just the lakes within that perimeter? Simply by selecting them based on the perimeter shapefile. So for that we can go to the menu Vector, Research Tools, select by location. By the way, if you just know that specific tool, select by location, you can also type it in the search and it will pop up where that respective menu is. Doesn't actually feature here. Here we are, select by location. Now it's visualized. Okay, this is the path I have to go down, and that's the respective menu we want to make use of. So here you need to make sure that you feature the correct vector layers. So hydrolakes is the layer we want to select from, and the Alpine convention parameter is the restrictive parameter that defines we want to select within that particular area. So if we click run, we will run into an error. This one tells me that there are some kind of invalid features which pose a problem to this particular process. So here under the advanced options, we can make sure that this is not an issue. So how do we deal with invalid features? We could ideally, in this example, I would simply skip any invalid geometries. However, that is still causing that same error. So I go with that particular option, just do not filter. And this should enable the process to run. And you can see by now already that, first of all, it was successful because it didn't complain a second time. You can check that in the log files. So, second time we started the algorithm, it just went well. To close that particular window, it's advisable to just close it. And you can also see in your map that it did something, simply because our lakes within the Alpine parameter are not featured in the normal green colors anymore, but rather highlighted in the highlight specific yellow color. So now that all our lakes within the Alpine parameter, and you can zoom in and just reassure that all the lakes are selected, now we can export just our selected features. Of course, we have to first select the correct layer, and in that layer we can now not, as previously, just select all the features, but just focus on the selected ones. And you will see the same menu. Just make sure that I'm not sure if I highlighted that before, you of course should select the correct coordinate reference system, which in our case was EPSG 3035. Make sure it's the geo package. That's the one we should select. We will talk about that in another lecture. Give it a proper name, and the layer name typically mimics the name lakes, and well, any of these lakes I would advise to also include the change projection in here. And once we save it, it would probably, well, let's see. First of all, yes. So it kind of combines the layer name with the actual file name. So I don't really like that one because it's a terribly long name, and you can change that here under source. I think the layer name is, the file name is fine with me. You can choose whatever makes most sense to you, just for you to know that you have the option to change it later on as well. You don't have to go with these extremely long file names. And everything you export will by default also show up in your layers panel. And this is now the layer which should have the right coordinate reference system. Here it's indicated, and just feature the lakes we are interested in. Okay. Good. What else is on the menu? We haven't covered the CSV file. All right. So if you want to add specific information from a CSV file, so imagine the scenario: you have a table with latitude and longitude coordinates. So in our example, these are the locations of the webcams in our study area, which we used for validation and training. So if we want to add that information where these webcams are located in our map, we can simply create an Excel table which has the column latitude and longitude, and first of all, save that table as a comma-separated value format, so a CSV file. And once we have that specific file, we can now also add it to QGIS, but we shouldn't add it as a drag and drop file to our layers, but rather read it in as an additional layer that comes from a comma-separated text file. So here we can now navigate to that particular file, which would be webcam locations. And you immediately will see a preview on what QGIS is doing of that file and what kind of columns and information we have within our file. You can also change between the delimiter. In our case, we could make use of the default as a comma-separate value, but we can also make custom delimiters. In our case, the comma is the one that is relevant. And what is important here, by default, it already looks for certain column names like latitude and longitude. Just reassure that these are also in the correct field. So you can select the respective latitude and longitude field. And this is correct in our example here. And once we add that particular file, we will also see that these locations are now newly added to our map. Okay, so far so good. These are now also locations which we want to export to our common coordinate reference system for Europe, so EPSG 3035. But we have seen that before, so we don't want to spend too much time on this. And finally, you probably want to style your layers. So once you exported all your data, you can clean your map again, empty all the existing layers, and just load in the ones which you reprojected, which you limited to the extent that is of interest to us. And then you can start giving them the respective colors, because lakes, yeah, probably don't feature that well if they're brown. Probably you want to give them a nice blue color. And you can easily do that again within our layer styling panel by changing the fill color to something that is maybe blue. You can also change the outline color, maybe in a darker blue, but this is probably only important for the small lakes. Hang on a moment. Stroke color is indicated in here. Okay, why don't I see the apply? Maybe because it already applies live. Then we don't have to apply it in addition. And you can now check how these smaller and larger lakes look like. You can also change the width of the stroke if they are barely visible. So here we can, for example, go with a stroke of 2, and you see if we zoom out, these smaller lakes become more clearly visible. Same you can do with all the other layers. Just go through the menu. Most of these things are kind of self-explanatory, and you can adjust the colors as you like. For our parameter, lastly, we also wanted to adjust, first of all, the color itself, and second of all, the transparency. Maybe in our example we went with 15%. So this way you can make sure it's neatly in the background. Also change the layers according to their importance in their position. So for point layers, it probably makes sense that they are on top of the lakes and everything is on top of the convention. We haven't added the countries yet, but I guess you're kind of getting familiar with the entire process and can work that one out as well. Well, maybe we show the countries, doesn't hurt too much. So let's go the quick way. World, they all have a fill color, which we don't want. They also have a transparency. Okay, no, that's still fine. But that fill color should be transparent. We just want to have the outlines. And depending on the zoom level, we can see them or see them less well. I think here it's probably advisable to play around with the stroke again. First of all, you have to select a certain layer if you want to change it. So stroke is here exactly. No, I have to hit it exactly on the head. Hit the nail on the head if I want to change the stroke color, but you see that it changes also on our map display. Good. So in the final chapter, we will compose our map. Now that we have all our layers downloaded, rendered as we like them, we can think about composing our map view. Okay, so let's assume we have all the layers we want in our projection, all the layers we want to display on our map. Final touch on our webcam locations. For example, currently we have them as dots. We would like to make them a bit bigger, that they're easily visible. And we would like to change their symbology, that they stand out a bit. We can do that with the respective menus in here. And if we additionally want to label them according to their location ID, which we have included in our CSV file, we can do that as well. And on top of that, we can also add some draw effects, like having a shadow included, which you can select in here, like a drop shadow or the source shadow. All these things can be added to your map. Okay, so for now we would like to focus on how to actually draw our map. So in our Git book you will find a detailed description how to do that here, and we quickly go through these individual steps that these are more easily findable. So first of all, let's go back to QGIS. We would like to add a new print layout. that will be the layout of our final map. So we can give it a name, Alpine Lakes, and maybe a version number if we do multiple of these layouts. And we should end up with an empty layout, which we can now add with additional items. So first of all, you will find the items all listed in here with the respective item properties, and the property of our base map is also given in here. Okay, let's start adding additional items in here. The first one would be to add a map. Once we selected that specific option, you will see the crosshair cursor changes, and we can now by drag and drop define the extent of our respective map. So, and this one will automatically mirror the map we have loaded in QGIS with all the layers loaded and all their specific layer renderings. So you should note that in here you can zoom in and zoom out based on the scale, and you can move your map with that specific move item content. So we can move it and we can zoom. And we go with 50 million here. And once we change the menu, it should automatically update. Oh, that one is a bit big. Maybe drop 1 0. And yes, here we cover now the extent of the Alpine perimeter. So we center it, and we have some space below, some space above, where we can place additional items. Like, for example, and note here on the right hand panel, we have now our map menu. Once you're happy with it, you can lock it in that specific position. Then we don't interfere with this one. Maybe also note, just for now, we have several items here which just become visible if we unfold the uppermost menus. So we probably want to give it a frame, and we can change the color and thickness. You have multiple options. Feel free to get familiar with that. We will just focus on the most important ones. So you can lock that item in here, and for example, if you want to add a scale bar, you can draw a specific scale bar down here, and immediately you will be able to also change the properties of our scale bar, just down here in item properties. So it looks already quite good. However, maybe you want to change the units from an odd number to a more even number, and maybe you also want to change where was that one? You can change the format that teleported us to another section. I did not actually want to go in. You can change the style. Yes, that was the one I was looking for. So according to your preferences, feel free to adjust all these parts. I actually like it rather simple. Don't want to draw too much attention to the scale bar, simply because the attention should be focused on the primary items, which would be the lakes. But if needed for reference, the scale bar would be available in here. So I don't frame it, I don't give it a particular background. I just want to have it neat and simple. Okay, so scale bar dealt with. Check. Let's add, for example, a legend. We want to show on our map what kind of features are included in here. So our legend deserves a title, and you notice that all the individual items automatically pick up the names of the items we have back in QGIS. So you can flip between QGIS and our layout view and compare that, will directly be the same. So the way I flip on a Mac, it's command larger, smaller than. It's quite the same as with all the other options when you want to flip between different views within one program. So it will be comparable on a Windows PC. So these names are just too long. Don't want to go with these long names, rather have something short and descriptive. How do we change these names? We're gonna find out soon. Maybe if we... yeah, okay. So if you uncheck auto update, you will be able to double click into that specific item and edit it as you like. Webcams and lakes, just make sure that maybe you want to be very consistent, go with capital initials, and so on and so forth. You can change it. You can also drop certain items if you don't want to have them included in your legend. For example, the DEM is still in QGIS, but we don't want to have it in our map because it's not selected. Also, this one is maybe rather self-explanatory, or you can mention that. So here, focus on the most important parts. Okay, so in the end, you will have a nice legend, which you probably also want to frame and put it in a place where, you know, ours is now a bit longer, bigger, but if it's nice, just put it in a place where it's easily visible and not in the way of our main objects, which would be, in our case, the lakes and the webcams. Okay, so what else? We probably want to insert a second map view. Insert the map inset up here in the top left, and you will notice that again it will show up with a respective scale. So we want to zoom out here quite a bit, and before we change anything in our inset, let's make sure the legend and the scale bar are locked. So select our inset again. We can also do that in here. Probably can also rename that one, and this one now was 90 million. Let's see if that kind of matches. Yeah, looks good. However, we still have all the lakes and all the webcams included in here. So in order to change that, we can do the following. First of all, we click follow the map theme, and now we can change the map theme and just uncheck the lakes and the webcams. We can keep the Alpine convention in here because it's rather okay, or like a good landmark for reference. If it did not update automatically, we can update it, and we notice, yes, everything we don't want to have in here is now gone. We want to make sure we also have a frame of our inset, and we probably want to highlight the extent of our map. We can do so by just drawing a shape, add a shape like a rectangle. So this is very much freestyle by hand. You might be able to do that a bit better. You can probably zoom into that part and just make sure that you really hit the object as you like. We want to make it transparent. So our fill color, nope. Where do we set it as transparent? The opacity can be changed, yes. And probably now everything is opaque, which was not the intention. Maybe our menu is just too small. I'm sure you can figure it out, and also I'm sure I can figure it out with a bit of time. So, fill color, you should be transparent. And here we have the transparent fill. Okay. So, and we want to change the color of our stroke. And we probably want to readjust it. So, therefore we can select the hand symbol. No, not the hand symbol. The cursor. And now we can do the fine-tuning according to our map display. Okay. So I use the scroll wheel to zoom out again. And you noticed in the meantime our main map also updated, which is rather unfortunate, but okay, let's get back to our main map, get back to the main view and update our map. Now the inset stays as it is, we update our map. You should have almost all the important ingredients on our map. However, what we don't have is a grid. So let's add a grid. Down here in the menu grid, you can edit, you can name it. Yeah, it's a grid, it's fine. And you can modify it. Modifying the grid brings us into another menu that is specifically meant for our grid. So here we have a couple of options. First of all, we want to go with markers because we don't want to have additional lines which are in our map. We just want to pinpoint with needle precision where the respective latitudes and longitudes are. And we want to display them with their respective latitudes and longitudes. So for our grid, but only for our grid, we can change the coordinate reference system. Here we want to specify by which units we run. So on the y-axis, every 2 degrees, or the other way around, we have to see about that. And we also want to select a marker style, which should be a crosshair. Simple marker. Down here we can select the crosshair. Now you notice we have very small crosshair symbols, but quite a few. So let's swap these two. I think that was the setup I intended. Now we should have a couple in latitude and a couple in longitude, that it's all readable, all good. So, and we also want to make use of a frame with interior ticks. So here on the frame border we can see where the ticks are exactly, and we can see in the map where that line would be based on the markers, as opposed to a straight line. So now we also should add some labels. So let's make that a bit smaller. Draw coordinates it is. Yes. Okay, so format should be decimal with a suffix. So we want to add whether it's north or east. We probably just want to focus, we don't want to replicate too much information. So all the information we have are on the left and on the lower end, that's fine. The top we probably want to preserve for the title, and also on the right hand side we don't need them because that is repetitive. What we want to change would be, we don't need all these zeros, right? So we can change the coordinate precision so that we have just the information needed. That all looks pleasing to my eye. And finally, you probably also want to give your map a certain title. Add dynamic text or add label. I forgot about. Well, we can always look it up in the Git book. Add a title, dynamic text, project title. Dynamic text, project title, here it is. Then you can draw a rectangle and give it a respective name. Project title. Where do we change? No, that's just the title. Item properties, here we are. Alpine Lakes. So that one looks rather small. You can change it with a respective font and different properties down here. I think that should all work out somehow. So in the end, once you're happy with all the settings, and notice our inset map was updated again. Okay, so the way to change that here is go to our inset map and unlock it. Should follow the map theme. So again, we update it. Okay, now we are happy. Just freeze that particular one. We're not happy with the title yet, but we could do so. I'm sure we can do so. And in the end, you want to export your image. And here you have different options. You can export it as a PDF. You can export it as an image with a given format. So PNG or JPEG should be fine. And then you should be happy. So this is the way you can compose your map and export your map. And thanks for your attention. Have a nice day.